Well, thank you, Jack. It's good to be able to put this right here. Good to be with you once again. Good to be with all of you, so many of you whom I know and have been with at various events, including the March for Life, over the course of the years. Others, perhaps tonight, is our first time together. But this is a delight for me. I've been looking forward to it all day. I've been with pro-life leaders all day today. We're having an all-day meeting, planning strategic activities for the coming months, and talking about the wide range of activities of the movement, whether political and legislative or educational, and post-abortion healing, pregnancy centers. Representatives from all these different branches of the movement were together today, and so the schedule worked out perfectly for me to be here tonight. And I come in and I see this cast of characters here. This is really a lot of fun. If you haven't really looked at this, take a good moment to look at it before you leave tonight. And I'm looking at this, and I know each and every one of these people. Some of them not only have worked with me, but have worked for me. For example, Father Dennis Wild still works as our Associate Director at Priests for Life. And then also Father West, Father Eichenauer, and Paul Schenk, who's now Father Paul Schenk, all worked on our pastoral team at Priests for Life. And of course, Congressman Chris Smith, his wife, Marie, is part of our pastoral team at Priests for Life and Gospel of Life Ministries. And she heads up an international network of lawmakers in other countries whom we assist in doing the pro-life battles in their own countries. And then the rest of these troublemakers, of course, they each have their own story, but this is a wonderful, so wonderful to see all those faces there, and so wonderful to see yours as well, because we're all united by one simple goal, and Jack already referred to it. It's not just to oppose abortion. It's not just to speak up against abortion. It's not just to reduce the numbers of abortions. Our goal is to end abortion. And we will. And we will. And we've got to renew ourselves in that, brothers and sisters, to the conviction that it's doable. You can't mobilize and energize people to join a movement if they don't believe that the goal of the movement is possible to achieve. We know it's possible to achieve. And we're going to see it achieved. We're not in this, and you know, the other thing too, especially as we're coming up to the March for Life, I was just doing an interview before we got started here tonight, and the question came up, and it comes up constantly when people talk about the March. They say, oh, and all the young people. And we have a nice contingent of younger folks here with us tonight. And sometimes people, I mean, obviously we all rejoice in and we affirm the involvement of the younger people in this movement. And sometimes people talk about it as if, oh, well, you know, we're going to let the younger people take care of finishing the battle that we started. Well, I'll tell you what. My attitude in looking at younger people is not to hand the torch over to them and say, here, you guys finish the task of protecting the unborn. I think what we need to do for our younger people in the movement is say to them, take our hand. We're going to go over the victory line together. We're not going to hand this on to the next generation. This has got to end now. Amen. It's already too late. It's already gone on way too long. And you know what? It's winnable. It's doable. And so let's take the hands of our younger brothers and sisters and say, come on with us. We're going to go into the promised land together. Because brothers and sisters, this thing can end sooner than any of us think. It really can. And tonight we're going to talk about I want to do a couple of things here. I want to talk about, obviously, the topic that I've been asked to speak about tonight. Defending life, and why that means resisting the tyranny of Obama. We'll explain what that means. And then I want to also do some very practical things and talk to you about some upcoming events and activities, including some things that I and my team will be doing during the days of the March for Life that many of you know about already. But I just want to review some practical things. And speaking about practical things, one of the things also on your chair that I want to bring your attention to now, before I get into the topic too deeply, these yellow cards are from us at Priests for Life. As I'm speaking, I know many of you are on our lists already, but as I'm speaking, there may be an aspect of what I say that you want to have more information about, ask about. We'll have a Q&A period, but we're not going to be able to get necessarily to every question you may have. Or if you want some resources that I refer to, just, there's a place on the bottom here to write whatever you want to write. On the back, you'll see the different ministries that we do, and you might want more information about a specific branch of our ministry. You can click off that box. Some of our stuff has to do with politics, others with the African American outreach, which Alveda King heads up, and you'll see all the different branches over there. Just click it off. We'll send you more information, and even if you already get our stuff, you might be able to be more specific on this card about how we can help you or your parish or your organizations, and then we will collect these before we're done. Okay, so that's on the practical level. Well, let's talk about this topic that I've been given tonight to share about. Tyranny is a strong word. It's a very strong word. And it should not be used lightly. What do we mean when we use the word tyranny in the context of the battle over abortion, and in the context of our beloved country and the office of its president, an office that we highly respect as Americans? How in the world can we speak about tyranny in reference to one of our nation's presidents? Well, brothers and sisters, there are two ways in which we can do so. One of them has to do with the legality of abortion itself, the government permitting it. The other has to do with the government trying to expand it. Those are two different things. This administration is doing both. And let's talk about that. Why would we call it tyranny? Well, because somebody else did first. And his name is St. John Paul II. What am I speaking about? In March of this year, March 25th to be exact, there will be a 20th anniversary of a very important document from the church. In fact, I know because I worked under John Paul II at the Vatican for a number of years, in the office that oversees pro-life activities. It's called the Pontifical Council for the Family. I know that he considered this one of the most important documents of his pontificate, and he wrote quite a few. Anyone know the document I'm talking about? Evangelium Vitae, the Gospel of Life. Issued on March the 25th, 1995. Anyone know why it was issued on March the 25th? Annunciation. That's the day of the incarnation. That's the day when God took on flesh. That's the day when Jesus became an unborn child. That's the day when human nature, the human nature of you and me and of the old and of the young and of the born and of the unborn, was swept up into the very nature of God and is forever united. Jesus, once becoming human, will never not be human. What a marvel, what a mystery. And this is what we celebrate at Christmas. Really, Christmas and March 25th, Annunciation, are both, when you delve into the history of the liturgy and the theology of the liturgy, they're really both the Feast of the Incarnation. Different aspects, we think about Jesus' conception, Jesus' birth, yeah, but both feasts are calling us to celebrate, rejoice in, and reaffirm our belief in the truth that God so much loves human nature that he took it upon himself. So, March 25th, 20 years ago, St. John Paul II issues this beautiful document called Evangelium Vitae, and he gives the church the most comprehensive, authoritative, definitive statement on abortion that there is, that the church has ever made. The document came out of a consistory of cardinals that met a few years beforehand to discuss, as consistories of cardinals do, key issues of the time, and they discussed threats against human life, and as a result of that consistory, this document began to be created, and John Paul II himself brought it to completion. In that document, one of the things that is dealt with, one of the things, it talks about abortion from so many different aspects, including, by the way, something that if you follow our ministry, you know what we are heavily involved in. The mercy, the healing, the forgiveness after abortion. All right? I want to talk a little bit about that as we go along here tonight. But in Evangelium Vitae, section 99, the Pope speaks directly to those that have had an abortion and urges them to trust with confidence in the mercy of God and to entrust their aborted child to the Lord and to turn to the help of those who can help them, and even after they find healing, to become, and he says to them, you can become among the most eloquent defenders of everyone's right to life. And so what will we see week after next at the March for Life? One of the things we will see is the Silent No More men and women, and that's our campaign together with Anglicans for Life, the Silent No More campaign, whereby these people who have all come through healing take up that challenge of John Paul II to become eloquent spokespersons for life, because they stand before that crowd and they stand before those TV cameras and they stand before the world with great courage and great humility, holding signs saying, I regret my abortion. And the men saying, I regret lost fatherhood. You know, a man can't have an abortion in his body, but he can have an abortion in his soul. Men commit the sin of abortion every time they choose it. Every time they say, that's what we should do. Let's go do that. Or you have to do that. And of course, a lot of men suffer because they didn't want it to happen, and they couldn't stop it. So we have the women, we have the men, and this year we're going to have siblings and aunts and uncles and grandparents. We're going to have people standing there who were former abortionists holding signs saying, I regret performing abortions. It's going to be very, very moving. We'll come back to that in a moment. Evangelium Vitae talks about this, talks about various aspects of the abortion issue. But pertinent to the topic of this tyranny is section 20 of the document. You know what he says there? You know, a lot of times we think about abortion as a bad policy. We're coming to Washington to the March for Life so that we can oppose the bad policy or the mistaken decision of the Supreme Court that legalized abortion. Well, all that is true. But you know, there are many bad policies, there are many poorly made decisions of many different courts that nevertheless carry legitimate authority. There are a lot of legitimate laws that we might not like, and that maybe after an election and a change of power in a particular legislative body, that law or that policy gets rescinded and replaced by a better one. Okay, well, that's what this process is all about in America with lawmaking and lobbying and so forth. There's plenty of bad policies and undesirable laws and court decisions that nevertheless have to be respected and obeyed because they were passed legitimately and they were within the scope of the authority of the government. This one's not. This one's not. The church does not believe that the legalization of abortion, whether by a law or a court decision or an executive decision or anything else, is a legitimate exercise of government authority in the first place. Put another way, Roe v. Wade isn't a bad court decision. It's not a court decision at all. In one sense it is, but what the church is saying is the court did not have authority to do that. Laws reaffirming Roe v. Wade, it's not that they're bad laws. The church is saying they're not laws at all. A law is not an act of violence. Something that legitimizes abortion or permits it is an act of violence, not a law. You know what that means? It doesn't have to be respected and it doesn't have to be obeyed.
Amen.
In fact, it must be resisted. It must be resisted.
Yes.
Absolutely resisted. It has absolutely no claim on our conscience. It has no claim on our obedience. And sometimes people say, yeah, but the law is not forcing anybody to have an abortion. So how is it that you don't obey something that's simply tolerating something rather than commanding you to do it? If the law were to say to us, you have to participate in abortion, you have to perform abortion, you have to encourage abortion, well, then it's easy to see how you don't obey that. You simply stand up and you say no. And no matter what the consequences are, you do not cooperate with that. But it's a little bit more complicated than that, because it's not a policy that says you must do this. It's a policy that says you must allow this. Well, you know how you disobey that? In the following way. If the law is saying, when someone else goes to have an abortion, that's legal, what it's saying to you is, you can't stop that. You can try to persuade, you can try to influence, but ultimately, you cannot stop that from happening. And therefore, put in another way, what the law is saying to us is, you can only love that unborn child so far, and then you must stop. You can only go so far in your love for that unborn child. And we say, you're not going to put a cap on our love. You're not going to tell us we've got to stop loving or intervening for our unborn brothers and sisters. We are going to do everything we can to save that life, and there is no point at which we're going to stop loving and intervening to save that life, no matter what consequences the law or the court are going to put on us. That's the stance of the Christian in the face of injustice. And we saw it in the apostles. See, some people think we go too far with all of this, but I like to ask those individuals, especially if they claim to be Christian or claim to be Catholic, how far would you go if a law were passed saying that you could not participate in the Mass? Would you obey that? Oh, sorry, I can't set foot in that church because they're going to have Mass there.
Heck no.
And you run into the church. That's what you do. You run in, you don't run out, you don't stay outside. If the law ever said that you could not participate in the Mass, what would you actually do? It's an interesting question. And it's not outside the realm of possibility. There's people right now facing that very thing in various parts of the world. So, brothers and sisters, here we are essentially dealing with the same question. Here we have a policy that is allowing our unborn brothers and sisters to be slaughtered, and we're expected to stand back and do nothing and say, oh, well, the law only says I can only go so far. It's not a law. Oh, but Roe v. Wade says this. Roe v. Wade doesn't have the authority of the paper it's written on. And this is where we have to recover that original sense of what the apostles meant when they were told not to do what? Preach in the name of Jesus. They ate and drank with him after he rose from the dead. You sit with somebody who came back from the dead, you're not going to be afraid of anything. And so these apostles say, we cannot help speaking of what we have seen and heard. And then they said to them, oh, you're going to whip us? You're going to throw us in prison? We will obey God rather than man. Now we have to be careful when we say, well, the Lord told me to do this, and the Lord told me to do that. Because if we're not careful about discerning that, we have absolute chaos, both in the religious and the civil order, because anybody can end up doing anything and claim that the Lord told them to do it. Unfortunately, many of the acts of terrorism that we witness are based on the same assertion. God told me to do this. God told me to do that. So this cannot be based purely in some kind of subjective assertion or belief that, oh, God is telling me to do this, that, or the other thing. In Christianity, in Catholicism, we base our stance on reason and faith together. And when it comes to the abortion question, it's more reason than faith. Faith reinforces everything we say about pro-life. Of course it does. That's one of the things, like Jack mentioned about this book of mine. For every day of the year, I have a scripture passage or a quote from Evangelium Vitae or a quote from Mother Teresa or one of the other saints, and then a little reflection about how that quote pertains to our pro-life commitment, and then the short prayer. 1 minute a day, you'll be nourishing your pro-life commitment. We got a bunch of them back there on the table. So, yeah, faith deeply reaffirms all that we believe and do in the pro-life movement. But brothers and sisters, this stance that we are talking about in favor of loving that child, this stand against tyranny, is based on reason. The human mind can see, just when you ask the question of what an abortion is, the human mind can see that it's wrong. Tearing a baby apart, tearing off the arms and legs, crushing the head. You know, Mario Cuomo was recently laid to rest. In the days of Cardinal O'Connor, he clashed with the former governor of New York. So did I. Whereas in the years that I was first getting involved in public pro-life work myself, and boy, we had a lot of things to say about Cuomo's assertions about being a Catholic who personally agreed with the church, but in his professional life he could not impose on the public the beliefs that we hold as Catholics. What nonsense. Our position in reference to the unborn children and the laws on abortion has absolutely nothing to do with imposing any beliefs on anybody. It has to do with protecting people despite others' beliefs. In other words, you don't have to believe anything, according to the law, you don't have to believe anything about the person sitting next to you. But if you try to harm or kill that person, the law has something to say about it. So in other words, what the law does is protects the person sitting next to you from your beliefs, if you happen to believe that they're not worthy of protection. If I happen to believe that the unborn are not persons, well, I'm not going to get in trouble with the law for that. But if I try to kill them, I should get in trouble with the law. Not for what I believe, but for what I did. So somebody can't commit murder and then go in front of the judge and say, well, Your Honor, I shouldn't be punished because I don't believe that he was human. And the judge is going to say, listen, you can believe whatever you want, but you can't take his life. So law doesn't impose beliefs, it protects us from beliefs that might harm us if people acted on them. So these guys in public office, guys and girls alike, okay, who say, I'm a Christian, I'm a Catholic, but I'm pro-choice, you know what? They're all screwed up in their thinking about this. They got it absolutely upside down, inside out, topsy-turvy. And whether they're doing that deliberately or they just don't know any better, you know what? Sometimes that's very hard to tell what's really going on in their mind and heart. But we don't have to figure that out. All we got to do is make sure that we elect public servants who can tell the difference between serving the public and killing the public. That's what we do at elections. So I bring up Cuomo because in these commentaries in recent days, you know, as he was laid to rest, and I was reflecting on this. And I said, you know, he gave a speech at Notre Dame defending his position, the position that many Catholics in public office take now, Catholics and non-Catholics alike. Obama's not a Catholic, but basically he comes down on the same position, trying to separate their private from their public stance. Almost exactly 25 years after Governor Cuomo gave the speech at Notre Dame, another public official gave a speech at Notre Dame. Who am I talking about? Obama. And why was he speaking at Notre Dame in 2009? Because he gave the commencement speech and he was given an honorary doctorate of law. Well, some of the senior class called me up a few months before graduation. Father Frank, can you come to Notre Dame for our commencement? We want to have an alternate commencement ceremony because we're not going to go to listen to Obama. Wow. And so, fortunately, that particular weekend, my schedule was open. I went up to Notre Dame, and on a beautiful spring day, we had an alternate commencement ceremony at the other side of the campus at the same time that Obama was speaking and being applauded and spewing out all kinds of illogical nonsense about abortion and public policy. We were in the grotto of Our Lady saying the rosary. I gave pro-life meditation on each of the mysteries, and on their graduation caps, these young men and women had the image of the precious feet of the 10-week baby in the womb. And we celebrated life. And we did that in a very positive way. They weren't standing there with bitterness and anger. They were standing there saying, this is who we are as the graduates of Notre Dame. This is what we stand for as Catholics. This is what we stand for as Americans. So we had a beautiful, beautiful day. But you know, if you take the text of President Obama's speech at Notre Dame, and you take the text of Mario Cuomo's speech at Notre Dame 25 years earlier, there are some words that you will not find in either of those speeches. Words that express exactly what abortion is. You will not find the word procedure. You will not find the word forceps. You will not find the word blood, dismember, decapitate, suction. How come those words aren't in those speeches? Are these supposed to be speeches about abortion? How come when those who defend abortion say they're talking about abortion, they never talk about abortion? That's what I want to know. Because they don't. They're not talking about abortion. They're going to talk about philosophy. They're going to talk about constitutional rights. They're going to talk about freedom. That Obama was talking about, faith necessarily admits of doubt. And he was trying to relativize the whole thing. You can be pro-life, you can be pro-choice, and really not, you know. But tell me what you're talking about, please. See, this is the problem I have. Tell me what you're talking about, because I don't know. That's why one of the favorite projects, and again, as I say, various of these guys have worked with me. We walk the halls of Congress. We'll take the whole team in. One time we took into, now he's going out of office, but pro-abortion, another pro-abortion Catholic in the Senate, Tom Harkin from Iowa. So I took 25 priests into his office. You know, in those Senate offices, you've been in the Senate offices, they're pretty big offices, a complex of offices. So I come walking in the front door, and the receptionist there looks up, and okay, you see a priest walking in. And then she sees a second one, and a third one, and a fourth one. And before you know it, everybody's sitting there, just looking up with their eye. It looked like there was the second coming or something. So what is going on here? And all these priests, we'd like to see the senator. The senator's not here. Well, you better let us see somebody, because we're not leaving until we do. And so they had us sit down with his top legislative aide about abortion. And that was one of many visits that we made. At other times we came back with a smaller group. But we went to the offices of the most pro-abortion members on the Hill. And you know what we asked them? We took the diagrams, and you'll see them on the table back there. The diagrams of the abortion procedure. Where you see the words forceps and blood, and, decapitate and dismember. Those are words used by Warren Hearn in the medical textbook Abortion Practice about how to do an abortion. So that's not us talking. This is the abortionists themselves, the language that they use to describe the procedure. So we bring these diagrams and these quotes in, and we said, listen, we're not here today to argue about Roe v. Wade. We're not here today to talk about philosophy or theology or even law. We're not here to advocate for or against any particular legislation. We're not even lobbying here today. We're here to ask one simple question. When the senator says the word abortion, is this what he means? You like that question? Yes. Because all we're trying to do is see whether or not we're talking about the same thing. Because we've got a diagram here, we've got quotes here from medical textbooks telling us that abortion is dismembering a baby. When the senator talks about abortion, is this what he means? Or does he mean something else? Just a very simple question. Do you know how many of these offices we went into, and the top legislative aides for these men and women of the Senate could not answer the question? They said, we don't know. And so I'm sitting there in front of them, and I said, you mean to tell me that you're the top legislative aide on the topic of abortion, and you don't even know what the senator means by the word? I'll tell you what, friends, it's a powerful approach to take. Each and every one of you can do this. And not just with politicians, with your friends, with your neighbors, with your pro-choice family members, with people in academia, with professors, anybody. who takes a position that they think abortion's okay. All right, well, listen, I'm not going to argue with you about whether it's okay or not, whether it's right or wrong. That's not even the discussion. The discussion is not whether it's right or wrong. The discussion is not whether it should be legal or illegal. This discussion that I'm talking about here is, what do you mean by the word? You know what? I'm convinced that is where we win or lose the debate, right there. Before we win or lose before we even start debating, because you have to understand what you're talking about. Once we establish what we're talking about, we've got the American people. We've got them on our side already. They have enough of a conscience. Enough of them have enough of a conscience to reject this when they are allowed to face what it is. Now, go back to the question of tyranny. Isn't that a strong word? Well, first of all, it's going to seem like a very strong word if what you have in your mind when you hear the word abortion is a much more benign, diluted thing than what the reality actually is. So what I'm arguing is, and I know Defend Life does, and Jack does, and these wonderful people do, and so many of us around the country do, we're arguing is that America will not reject abortion until America sees abortion. We have got to establish the starting point. What are we talking about? Now, once we do that, then one can begin to understand that maybe we have a basis here for using some very strong language. But then the other point that comes in, again, is what St. John Paul II wrote in Evangelium Vitae number 20. What he says there is this: a state legalizes abortion, and it has no longer become the common home where everyone can find protection. Instead, it has now become a place where the strong can kill the weak, and the weak have no recourse. You know what he says about that? He says three things about that. First of all, he says, some call this freedom, but it is the death of freedom. The second thing he says about it, the disintegration of the state has begun when this is allowed. The disintegration of the state. Notice, he's not just talking about a bad policy decision, a bad law, one issue among many. This is not one issue among many. This is everything. It's the foundation and the heart and core of every issue. It's the disintegration of the state itself. And the third thing he says about it is what I already told you. It creates a tyrant state. Now, I said that the tyranny of an administration that's pro-abortion can be described in two levels. One, just permitting abortion. But now we have an additional problem. This government administration is trying to expand it. Not only is it trying to expand abortion, it wants us to cooperate in that expansion. And we don't even have time tonight to talk about all the different ways that it wants us to cooperate in that expansion, but I'll tell you one of them. It wants practically every employer in America to cover abortion-inducing drugs and contraceptives in their health insurance policies. And this affects so many of us. It affects me at Priests for Life. And all the people that we employ, we have about 50 employees on our team. And we provide them health insurance. And the Obama administration, several years ago, came out with this mandate from the Department of HHS. This is a direct result, but this flows directly from Obamacare. By the way, when the Congress voted on Obamacare, you might remember when the House had the vote, it was a Sunday afternoon that they scheduled the vote for back in March of 2010. And so the church-going members of Congress, of which there are many, said, no, they came, but they said, we're going to have church right here on Capitol Hill. So they went into Statuary Hall, and they had church. And several days before, when they decided to do this, again, I got a phone call from one of the members of Congress. Father Frank, could you come down and give us a sermon? I said, I'll be right on that, Acela. I went down there and I gave them a sermon. And I told them, I said, listen, Jesus Christ has transformed our politics. The very reason that you're sitting here today as representatives of the people is because Christianity has transformed politics into a representative form of government, because what it was before, in the pagan view of government, the people don't count. You've heard the expression, the law comes from the mouth of the king. The king gets up one morning and decides, well, this is going to be the law today, or this is going to be the policy. The people have no input into it, and they have no recourse against it. The law comes from the mouth of the king. The people's voice, the people's opinion, the people themselves don't count. But when Christ came, he taught us that we all have access to God. He taught us that we're all sons and daughters of God. He taught us that we could share the very nature of God. Well, then, the people count. And then authority has to recognize that. And therefore, authority becomes service. That's what I told these members of Congress. Your only power is to serve the good of the people who elected you. Your only power is to respect and protect the rights, not that you gave them, but that God gave them, starting with life. So they passed this Obamacare legislation. I guess I didn't preach long enough, or hard enough, or to as many of them as I needed to. No, but the point is, no, they passed the legislation. So in that legislation, buried somewhere in those 2,000 pages of legislative text, was the grant to the Secretary of HHS the authority to make these requirements in health insurance plans. And so, shortly thereafter, they created this list of services that would have to be covered by, as I say, practically every employer in America. And when we saw this list and it said contraceptive services, abortion-inducing drugs, you know what we said? We will obey God rather than that. We're not going to do it. And of course, we were one among many different groups and leaders and employers who were looking at this, and they were coming to the same conclusion. And so, what do you do when the federal government has a policy that you say is unjust and against your conscience, or you, among other things, you introduce a federal lawsuit? And so the lawsuits began to be introduced at the beginning of 2012. Ours, I'm happy to say, was the fourth of what became close to 100 different cases. Ours was the fourth. Right after EWTN was the third. We were practically introduced our lawsuits on practically the same day. And what did we say in the lawsuit? We said that this requirement violates our religious freedom, because religious freedom is protected by federal law. In fact, President Clinton signed into law the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which gave additional protections. And when we talk about religious freedom, we're not just talking about you can go to whatever church you want. What we're talking about is not just how you worship on Sunday, but how you conduct your business affairs on Monday, and how you do everything else you do 7 days a week. And we said, listen, you can't require us to do something that is violating a tenet of our faith. And again, it's not subjective, it's objective. The fact that it's a teaching of the faith that we cannot facilitate abortion-inducing drugs or contraceptives that somebody else might use is not something we made up. It's a teaching, it's an objective teaching of the faith. So we said, no, we're not going to do that. And we're asking you to overturn this mandate. And so that lawsuit is still in progress. Originally, the court ruled against us. We appealed to the Circuit Court of Appeals in D.C. They recently ruled against us just this past November. So now that was a 3-judge panel. So now we're appealing to the full court. And if they rule against us, we're going to appeal to the Supreme Court. And no matter what the courts do, Supreme or otherwise, we have said already to the government, we have said to the public, we will not obey this mandate. Yay. Absolutely, in no way, shape, or form. We don't care what the government does. You want to come in and arrest us? You want to take us to jail? You want to close down our organization? You want to fine us? First of all, we're not going to pay 1 penny. Primary reason, because we don't have it. We don't have the money. We're not going to pay 1 penny of fines, because it's unjust to begin with. If the law that you're trying to uphold is unjust, then so is the fine. And secondly, we're just not going to obey it. Now, what the government's trying to do, understand the approach that they're taking. They're not coming in there with a frontal attack and saying, oh yes, you will obey this mandate. We are more powerful than you. No, they're not doing that. They're trying to take the opposite approach. They're trying to appear to take the opposite approach. Because now they've created an accommodation. And they say to groups like us, well, listen, you know what? You're right. You have religious freedom. So just sign this form, all right? Just sign this form that says you don't want to provide this coverage, and guess what? You don't have to provide it. Okay, here's the catch. Once they've got that form in their hand, they contact the insurance company, because now they know the company we're using, and now they know the employees that we're employing, and they go to the insurance company and say, okay, you've got to provide exactly the same coverage because these people are employees of this life. What's the problem with that? The problem with that is that the employees end up getting the coverage for these morally objectionable activities precisely because they are employees of Priests for Life. So we are still put in the position of cooperating in this big scheme of the government to expand access to abortion through these abortion-inducing drugs. And our response is very simply this. We cannot cooperate with this plan in ways big or small. If you want to make sure that our employees have the coverage for these things, which, by the way, they're not going to use it anyway, but if you want to make sure that they have coverage for these things that we teach people shouldn't do, you're going to have to do it without us. Certainly, they can find out who our employees are. Certainly, they can find a way. If these employees want the coverage, let them raise their hands, let them go to some kind of website and sign up for it. Let them write the letter. But we're not going to write the letter that in essence then triggers the reality that these people have coverage for this activity. This can become rather a fine point. And some people might say, you know what, Father Frank, you guys are making way too much of a big deal about this. Sign the darn form. The form says you object. Sign the form, no big deal. You know, remember the story in the Old Testament from the book of Maccabees about, what was his name, the old man who they said, well, the Greeks had taken over, and they said, eat this meat, eat the pork, and he said, no, we're not allowed by our religious law to eat pork. I said, well, yeah, but you don't want to, it's just a small thing. Here's what you do. Take some meat that isn't pork, so you won't actually technically be violating your conscience. But make them think that it is, and then go there and eat it, and then they'll be satisfied, and so will you, and everybody goes home happy. And he said, I will not go home happy, because now many people, including the younger generation that I'm trying to raise up in the faith, will think that in my old age, I violated the faith of my forefathers. I will not do it. Now, is eating a big little piece of pork or signing a form, both of them simple, small acts that are done in 2 seconds. Or better yet, the early Christians, when they were persecuted by the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was very tolerant. But this Christianity movement was growing strong, and they wanted everything to be in order. So they wanted to make sure that everybody showed their allegiance to Caesar. So you remember the ceremony that Christians were asked to take part in. Just took a few minutes. Take a little pinch of incense, throw it on the fire, and say, what? Caesar is Lord. Doesn't take much time, doesn't take much energy. Can a Christian say that? So you see, it doesn't matter how big or small the action is. Some people are looking at this, and the judges are saying, oh, this is ridiculous. This is not a substantial burden on your faith. All you're doing is signing a form. And to me, what echoes in my mind is, this is not a burden against your faith. All you're doing is eating a piece of pork. This is not a burden against your faith. All you're doing is throwing a pinch of incense on the fire and saying Caesar is Lord. It's not how big the action is. It's what it means. Am I ultimately loyal to Jesus Christ or not? The government is wrong on this, and I believe that, even though we're not going to obey it anyway, I believe that we will be vindicated in the courts, because religious freedom is just too deep. It's too deeply rooted in the soil, in the heart and the soul of America to be thrown out the window like this. Not that we can't lose it if we're not vigilant, but we're being vigilant, and so are countless others of our fellow citizens, and so are you. And that's why we're together in this. And brothers and sisters, that's why we're also asking for your support, for your involvement, for your prayers. We're all in this together. We don't want people looking at Priests for Life and saying, oh, isn't that great what they're doing? We want them looking at us and saying, isn't this great what we're doing? All of us together. Because we need you. You need organizations like ours. We need the common witness that we give to each other. We need each other. And yet, don't be surprised when you realize you're part of a remnant. You know, we don't need majorities of people in our society to bring an end to abortion. We don't need masses and masses of countless hordes of people. We need a small, faithful band of people who are willing to stop at no sacrifice. That's what it takes. It's not large numbers. It's small numbers that are willing to make large sacrifices. That's what we all need to do, and that's what you are doing. So let me just turn to a practical, a couple of notations here, and then we'll go on with the rest of our program, including the Q&A. Coming up, obviously the March for Life, but the weekend before the March for Life, I'm speaking in a parish in Annapolis, St. John Neumann. Yes. At Saturday, I'm just speaking at 2 masses. I think the Sunday mass is at 11. Then I'm giving a talk to the youth group in the mid-afternoon. And then Saturday, at 2:30, he knows my schedule better than I do. And then Saturday, there's a vigil mass that I'm preaching at as well. I don't know if it's 4 or 5. But hey, anybody who wants to come over there, that'd be great. And then, come the March for Life, you have some activities you've already been invited to take part in. But let me just tell you a couple of the things that I'll be doing and my team will be organizing. First of all, on the day before the March, on Wednesday the 21st, we will be at the 16th Street Planned Parenthood in the morning for a prayer vigil. So that'll be from 8 to 10. We expect several hundred people lining the streets, most of them youth groups coming in from around the country. If you want to come pray with us during that time, we will give witness there. That afternoon, the youth rally, the March for Life youth rally, I'm happy to say, is organized by our Priests for Life youth department. And Brian Kemper is a great youth leader who has put together a marvelous program for young people, and that'll be from 2 to 4:30 in the afternoon at the Renaissance DC Hotel, where the March for Life will be centered this year. The next morning, the great morning of the March itself, we will be coordinating and I will be preaching at the ecumenical service at Constitution Hall. We've been there the last few years. This service actually has been going on for over 20 years, but the last few years we've used Constitution Hall, and this year we want to fill it up. That is a beautiful venue. I'm sure most of you have been there at some point or another. We're going to have clergy from dozens of denominations. We're going to have a beautiful worship service. I'll start with a mass at 7:30, but then the interdenominational service will start at 8:30. And not only will it fire you up spiritually, but if you want to, for yourself and for anyone else you can bring, have a really unique educational experience of the unity of the body of Christ. You're going to see a sight that you don't see very often. Bishops and priests and deacons of dozens of different denominations, and all in their different vestments, walking in together, singing together, standing up together and saying, yes, we believe in the Lord of life and we want our unborn brothers and sisters protected. It's, for me, one of the most inspiring moments of the year. And I'm confident it will be for you as well. So if you can join us, if you can urge others to join us, even if you just spread the word to groups that you know are coming, a beautiful prayer experience the morning of the March. Go to nationalprayerservice.com for all the further details, and you'll even see an excerpt from some of the services of the past years. nationalprayerservice.com. And then finally, of course, the March itself. When the March finishes, and I'm sure many of you have been there, if you stop in front of the Supreme Court once the March gets to that point, you'll be able to listen for a little bit to the testimonies of the men and women of the Silent No More campaign. And one of the things we're doing this year, as I referred to briefly earlier, is that we're expanding the testimonies So that it not only includes the mom and the dad, but there will be siblings, there will be young people there standing up and saying, I lost a brother, I lost a sister to abortion. It's going to be very moving, because they're going to share that, their parents are going to be there. We'll have a former abortionist expressing his regret. We'll have grandparents. It's going to be a beautiful experience, brothers and sisters, of the healing of the whole family from abortion. It's no longer just a question of, oh, that mom, let's help her overcome her regret. It's the whole family that's been wounded. It's the whole society that's been damaged. We all need healing. And you know who else needs healing? We do. Pro-life advocates who try to save lives, but fail. How about someone you counsel, maybe you're sidewalk counseling, or you're in a pregnancy center counseling, or you're talking to somebody, or trying to pass a pro-life law, elect a pro-life public official, and you know that if you fail, as we often fail, lives are lost in the process. Well, you know what? We've got to grieve those lives. And we've got to mourn those children. And unless we do so properly, we could risk becoming either discouraged on the one hand, or angry and bitter on the other. We don't want either one of those things. And we don't need either one of those things. We need to renew our strength and move forward together to the goal, which, as I said at the outset, can be summarized in two simple words: end abortion. We're going to do it. We're going to celebrate the victory together. And it's going to be because you and I responded to a God who gave himself away completely that we might have life. And he's the one who both teaches and empowers us to give ourselves away completely so that the unborn may have life. Thank you for doing so. God bless you.